Inside the Forbidden City, the hallways stretch endlessly. The footsteps are quiet, too quiet. These are not soldiers or courtiers. They are the shadows of the empire. They had no heirs, no families, and no power of their own, and yet for centuries they stood closer to the emperor than anyone else. They whispered in his ear, guarded his secrets, and sometimes ruled in his name. They were called eunuchs, men without manhood, but with power beyond imagination. This is their story, one of loyalty, ambition, humiliation, and survival. What is a eunuch, and why did they exist? The idea of the eunuch goes back thousands of years. In the ancient world, from Mesopotamia to China, powerful rulers needed servants who could be trusted in the palace, especially around the royal women. A eunuch, having been castrated, was seen as safe. But there was more to it than that. In China, eunuchs became tools of control, men stripped of family ties and therefore seen as loyal only to the throne. They could not build dynasties or pass down wealth. That made them politically convenient. Yet over time, these same people began to realize something. If they could never have a family, perhaps they could build something else. Influence. So, how did the eunuch system arise? By the Han Dynasty, eunuchs had already become an integral part of palace administration. But it was in the Ming Dynasty, the 14th to 17th centuries, that their power exploded. The system became formalized, bureaucratic, and massive. There were the 12 offices, 4 agencies, and 8 bureaus, a full government within a government. At the top stood the director of ceremonial, and more importantly, the director of the palace services, positions that reported directly to the emperor, bypassing ministers. Why did emperors trust them? Because ministers came from families and factions, but eunuchs were alone. Their entire existence depended on imperial favor. One Ming Dynasty saying summed it up perfectly. Officials are the emperor's tongue. Eunuchs are his hands. And sometimes those hands acted without permission. Let's meet a few names that shaped Chinese history from behind the curtain. Zhao Gao, the manipulator of the Qin dynasty. Zhao Gao started as a minor attendant, a palace driver. But when the first emperor of Qin died, Zhao Gao forged imperial decrees, manipulated succession, and helped place the weak Hu Hai on the throne. In doing so, he effectively controlled the empire and set off a chain of corruption and rebellion that ended the Qin dynasty in just a few years. He became the symbol of eunuch treachery, but he wasn't the last. Cai Lun, the inventor. Not all eunuchs were villains. In the Eastern Han Dynasty, Cai Lun revolutionized human civilization by inventing a reliable method for making paper. So even within a class defined by loss, some found ways to create lasting legacies. Wang Zhen, Liu Jin, and Wei Zhongxian, the Ming tyrants. By the Ming era, eunuchs controlled not only palace life, but national policy. Wang Zhen led the emperor into a disastrous campaign against the Mongols and was killed when the army collapsed. Liu Jin, one of the infamous 8 tigers, embezzled fortunes in silver and ruled like a king before being executed. And then came Wei Zhongxian, perhaps the most powerful eunuch in all Chinese history. Wei controlled the Eastern Depot, the imperial secret police. He filled prisons, tortured opponents and silenced scholars. He built temples to himself and forced officials to worship him. For nearly a decade, the Ming court lived in fear of a man who had no family, no heirs, and nothing left to lose. Except for a few eunuchs who managed to do well for themselves, most of those living behind the high palace walls didn't have glamorous lives. They began as poor boys, sold or volunteered by desperate families. They were taken to the palace, subjected to cleansing, the brutal operation that made them eunuchs. The physical pain was excruciating, but the psychological scar ran deeper. Many spent the rest of their lives seeking approval, status, or redemption through service. Inside the Forbidden City, ranks were strict. Some eunuchs swept floors or tended lamps. Others served tea to concubines. But a few, those who earned the emperor's trust, could rise astonishingly high. They became gatekeepers, treasurers, commanders, even spies. The Eastern Depot and the Western Depot were essentially China's first secret police, run by eunuchs. They spied on officials, censored letters, and removed threats to the throne. Imagine walking through the corridors of the palace, knowing that every whisper might be overheard, every gesture reported. That was the world the eunuchs built, part prison, part empire. It's hard to imagine what it meant to live without family, love, or legacy in a world obsessed with lineage. For many eunuchs, power became the only way to feel alive, a form of revenge against the society that had rejected them. Some channeled that energy into loyalty and service. Others turned it into cruelty and manipulation. In Buddhist temples, you can still find tablets donated by retired eunuchs praying to be reborn whole in the next life. That small detail says everything. They sought redemption in a body and a world that had taken everything from them. By the late 19th century, the eunuch system was collapsing. When the Qing dynasty fell in 1911, the last generation of palace eunuchs lived out their days in poverty, nostalgia, or shame. One of them, Sun Yaoting, born in 1902, became famous decades later as the last eunuch of China. He served in the palace during the final years of the Qing court and lived long enough to appear on television in the 1990s. His interviews were heartbreaking. "I was never a real man," he said, "but I was never allowed to be a real person either." His story closed the book on 2,000 years of imperial servitude. In modern culture, eunuchs appear as villains, schemers, whisperers in the dark. But that image is only half the truth. They were victims as much as conspirators, men forced into service, caught in systems of power they could neither escape nor fully control. Some were cruel, some were brilliant. Many were simply forgotten. They remind us that every empire has its shadows, people who hold power only because they have been broken by it. They lived behind red walls, between silk and blood. They lost their bodies but gained access to the heart of imperial power. They were slaves, ministers, torturers, inventors, and survivors. Maybe the eunuch story isn't just about the past. Maybe it's about what happens when a system values obedience more than humanity, when people trade everything they are just to stand close to power. The empire is gone, but the pattern remains. Every age has its eunuchs, those who give up their souls for a taste of influence.